Hi, it's Eason, and welcome to Movie Fridays, a new segment in which I will be talking about movies that you might want to consider watching or avoiding on your Friday nights, Saturday nights, or just over the weekend. Today I will be covering Guns Akimbo, the new action comedy feature directed by Jason Lee Howden, who has previously directed the horror comedy Deathgasm. Now, Deathgasm was director Howden's sort of good-natured mocking love letter to the metal subculture. Now, Deathgasm was a nice enough movie. It had enough in-jokes for metalheads like myself to point and laugh at, the humor was alright, the action and horror set pieces were well enough done, and the absurdity of its premise did not in any way undermine its delivery, at least to a certain extent. This also goes for Guns Akimbo. Guns Akimbo is the story of Miles, played by Daniel Radcliffe with an American accent. I mention this especially because I have a preference for his native British accent for some reason. It just feels odd seeing the man that I have basically equated to Harry Potter in my head speak with an American accent. But anyway, Miles is your typical millennial nerd drifter who by day works a job that he really doesn't like and had better expectations from, and by night goes to his nerd cave and plays internet tough guy, trolling people on various websites. Like many other people, Miles is aware of a new type of reality show called Schism, which is Skizm. It is basically a live deathmatch where a bunch of psychopaths kill each other and people watch it. Now, Miles, after having a couple beers too many, has the bright idea to start trolling anyone he finds on Schism forums. Unfortunately for him, the Schism admins take notice and they respond by breaking into his house, bolting guns to his hands, and telling him that he has to kill the current champion, Nyx, played by Samara Weaving, who in turn is told that her new challenger is Miles. Yes, the movie's premise is really as absurd as that. Your everyday loser internet tough guy Miles suddenly finds himself in a real life and death situation with tough as nails, as of yet undefeated Schism champion Nyx coming to kill him, and all he can do is either run or try to defend himself. And believe you me, Miles just isn't the type to stand and fight, at least not initially. Now, first and foremost, I want to praise Daniel Radcliffe for managing to play a complete fish out of water, completely panicked, inadequate, and ill-equipped Miles almost to perfection. Kudos also goes to the makeup department, who always managed to make him look like an insomniac shit. Like, seriously, the guy has dark circles around his eyes, he looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days, he's constantly drenched in sweat, and he's constantly screaming and trying to survive. Which is also how the first act of the movie, and by and large the second, plays out, in which Miles is the hunted and Nyx is the hunter. This dynamic sort of starts to switch sort of midway through the movie, when Miles finally decides that he's going to strike back in whatever capacity that he thinks he will be able to against an opponent like Nyx. Speaking of Nyx, Samara Weaving manages to do a very convincing job in portraying an unhinged, coke-addicted psychopath whose primary focus in life seems to be gunning as many people down as possible and then taking their loot for the hell of it. Being the undisputed and as of then undefeated champion of Schism, she's actually in kind of a gamer Gerard Butler type situation in which she's basically being forced to play this game. And lo and behold, Miles is supposed to be her last opponent. The one who is forcing her is Richter, played to absolute scenery-chewing, hammy, unhinged perfection by Ned Dennehy. This tattoo-faced, drug-crazed, grind-freak son of a bitch plays the main antagonist in the movie, and boy, does he play the main antagonist. Richter is the type of villain that you really want in an absurd movie like this, or in a movie that is seemingly self-aware enough to manage to poke fun at its own lack of seriousness. Richter is the type of villain that you love laughing at or laughing with because he is just that funny. He's incredibly sadistic, he's completely crazy, and he is an absolute joy to watch. One final character that is worth mentioning is the homeless man that Miles befriends when he's on the run from Nix. The homeless Australian man is probably one of the best parts of this movie, mainly because he's just so honestly and genuinely crazy that you can't help but smile at this guy. If you are going to watch Guns Akimbo, you have to be aware of one principal truth. This is not a thinking kind of movie. Guns Akimbo isn't a smart movie, as you might be gathering by the premise or just how ridiculous the premise is. It's not a smart movie. It doesn't pretend to be a smart movie. It doesn't pretend to have any clever twists or anything that may make you go, oh, they really thought that one through, didn't they? There's none of that. This is the kind of dumb, comical, absurdist action movie that you watch for the shootouts, for the fights, for the action, for the blood and the guts. If you go into this movie with any other kind of expectation, you are going to be sorely disappointed. What Guns Akimbo is trying to be is just a fun, absurd, visually spectacular action spectacle, and that's about it. There's very little character development, even though Nix as a character has a tragic backstory. It is treated somewhat like an afterthought. It is just briefly glazed over and not really mentioned. The main thing in terms of character development that happens is Miles basically growing acclimated to his new situation and managing to come out on top, but you knew that already. Guns Akimbo, however, has a couple of shortcomings that keeps it from being the endlessly rewatchable action extravaganza that you might be hoping for. The first is that the action cinematography is not the best. There's a scene earlier in the movie where Nix goes against a warehouse full of armed thugs. And although it shows that a lot of effort went into making this scene, the action is extremely difficult to follow. Not quite Quantum of Solace difficult, mind you, but still difficult. Your perspective is constantly changing, you are moving with the character, but this is not done with a focused or on-point way. In that you're constantly treated to different effect shots, you're constantly treated to different perspectives, lots of things happen, but it is extremely difficult to discern exactly who is shooting whom in what position. And given that this is so, it sort of robs you of sitting back and going like, whoa, would you look at that? The movie manages to find its even keel after that scene, and that no other action scene in the movie quite disorients you like that, even though there are some scenes where chaos ensuing can make things a bit difficult to follow individually. The second part where Guns Akimbo sort of falters is, unfortunately, the comedy. This was also a persistent issue in Deathgasm in that the movie was funny, but you could still easily separate the jokes that were forced from the jokes that happened naturally. This is also the case with Guns Akimbo. To give an example, the whole entire scene of Miles's encounter with the homeless Australian guy is of course played for laughs. This is a guy who has guns bolted to his hands, talking to a homeless crazy person, basically. But while the whole scene has some nice jokes, especially in terms of dialogue coming from our homeless gentleman, it really overstays its welcome. And some of the other jokes that are meant to be funny, or some of the more cliched gags, like there's a hammer time scene, basically, and this type of cliche doesn't really entertain. Furthermore, not every joke lands, or not every joke lands in the way that they think it will, because you can clearly see that the director thought a particular joke or a particular gag inserted in a given scene was a good idea, but you can also see how it is falling flat. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the humor in Guns Akimbo works so much better when it is deadpan and dry. There are so many examples of this type of humor in the movie, and they work so well, and point of fact, they work so much better than the actual framed this is a joke type jokes. Soundtrack wise, the movie is okay. I mean, I expected kind of more from it, I guess, because when it is an action movie like this, you want to have a star-studded or at least very captivating, very action-packed sort of soundtrack, which unfortunately I couldn't really find here. All in all though, Guns Akimbo doesn't really seem to have such lofty ambitions as to being the next best thing in action or action comedy. It just means to be an entertaining movie, and is it entertaining? I would say yes, it is, but only if you don't think about it. I mean, if you're the type who sits in front of a movie like this and starts bitching about how if guns were actually bolted to your fingers, you probably would be in so much pain that you wouldn't be able to move, this really isn't gonna be the movie for you. And did I like it? Yes, I did, actually. I mean, I didn't go into Guns Akimbo expecting anything but a dumb action flick with probably some visually spectacular set pieces, with more bullets than those magazines could possibly contain being spilled in every direction, people dying left and right, with some sort of a plot in the middle of it. I wasn't disappointed. I usually keep my expectations pretty low when it comes to movies. If I am not in awe of the director's previous work or something, I usually go in just wanting to have a good time, and Guns Akimbo did it for me. I mean, it might be, like I said, I just didn't expect anything other than an entertaining action flick, and I was satisfied. So, you like action movies, you like action comedies, you want to watch Daniel Radcliffe run around in the streets of what I believe is New York with guns bolted to his hands and nothing but bare slippers, his morning robe and boxer briefs looking like complete shit. You want to see Samara Weaving as a tough-as-nails tank girl XP type punk chick who kicks ass and takes names all goddamn day long. This is the movie for you. Guns Akimbo isn't the best movie that you're gonna see this year, the best movie that you have seen so far, and will probably not be the best movie that you have seen in the years to come. But it is well worth a watch, so I would say give it a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed if all you're looking for is a bit of fun. If you've already watched Guns Akimbo, please leave me a comment below. I would love to know what you thought about it. For everybody else, if you liked this episode and would like to see more of it, please subscribe. And until next time, this is Eason. Peace out.